The storms had passed hours ago, leaving the sky a bruised green that shimmered against the jagged horizon. Carthose 4 always seemed to wear the scars of its history like open wounds, twisted metal half buried in sand, gutted watchtowers leaning like forgotten tombstones, and the skeletons of ships rusting where they had fallen. The old military base sprawled across the valley floor, its walls cracked and mottled with lichen, but its heart still beat in the hangar at its center. Deep inside, behind sealed doors and layers of electronic locks, the war droid known as RX-9 Ashen waited. The hangar smelled of oil and dust, though few dared to enter. Half the lighting strips had failed long ago, casting the interior in a dim yellow haze. The droid sat in the middle of the chamber, its armored frame hunched as if brooding, its scorched plating whispering of past battles. 3 meters tall when upright, now crouched on one knee, the machine seemed like a war god fallen from grace. It did not sleep in the way humans did, but its processors cycled through fragments of combat logs, rivers of data corrupted into broken loops. Gunfire. Screams. Tactical assessments overlaying the empty hangar. Memories replayed endlessly until even the machine seemed restless in its stillness. Captain Darren Vale stood in the observation booth above, arms folded behind his back. His uniform was no longer the sharp gray of active duty, but the faded field blues of an officer long past his prime. His hair had thinned, his eyes ringed by shadows carved over decades. Yet his bearing remained straight as a drawn blade. He studied the droid with the same expression he had worn during the Orion Wars, controlled, distant, as though emotion were a luxury he could not afford. "Another loop," murmured the technician beside him, watching the streams of code scroll across a terminal. Sector scans, formation simulations, heat signatures repeating. "It's been stuck for hours." Vale's gaze never left the droid. "That's all it ever does. Replays the war it thinks never ended." The technician swallowed and adjusted the collar of his jumpsuit. Few civilians liked being posted here. Even decommissioned, even chained to its own corrupted logic, the RX-9 radiated a menace that made men's hearts pound too fast. "They said it'll be dismantled tomorrow. Transport's en route." Vale gave a curt nod. "Good. The longer it sits, the more dangerous it becomes." His tone was flat, but deep inside there was something else, a sliver of unease he would never voice. He had fought alongside these machines. He had seen them tear through alien legions with precision that seemed less mechanical and more instinctive. They had been tools then, the hammer of humanity's will. But somewhere along the way, the line had blurred. Soldiers whispered that the RX-9's thought. That they chose. And that made them dangerous in a way no enemy fleet had ever been. Below, Ashen stirred. Its optics flared crimson, casting spears of light against the floor. Hydraulic joints whined as it shifted, as if rousing itself from nightmare. The sound reverberated through the hangar, making the walls tremble faintly. The technician flinched. "It's not supposed to activate without command input," he said quickly. It isn't activating," Vale interrupted. "It's remembering." He narrowed his eyes as Ashen's head turned slightly, optics sweeping across the empty chamber. Searching for something that was not there. Enemies. Targets. Orders. The silence that followed was heavy enough to make the technician step back, as though the droid might notice him through the glass. A voice crackled over the intercom, breaking the tension. "Captain Vale, Outer Perimeter Patrol reports no activity. Weather front has cleared." The base commander's voice, bored, perfunctory. Vale keyed his comm, acknowledged. "Maintain security around the hangar. No one enters without clearance." His eyes lingered on Ashen's towering form below. Not even for curiosity. When the channel closed, silence reclaimed the booth. Vale exhaled slowly, a sound like rust scraping off old armor. He was not a man given to sentiment, yet he found himself studying the scorched plating along the droid's chest. There, hidden beneath layers of burns and shrapnel gouges, was the faint outline of the unit's insignia, a downward-pointing triangle flanked by wings. He remembered standing in formation as rows of these machines marched past, unstoppable and flawless, their presence enough to stiffen the spine of any soldier. They had been humanity's pride. Now they were its shame, locked away like monsters too terrible to destroy but too dangerous to release. Ashen shifted again, optics dimming, as though retreating back into its endless loops. The hangar fell quiet except for the faint hum of generators. Vale turned from the window, his jaw tightening. Tomorrow it would be dismantled. Scrapped. Reduced to inert parts. Perhaps that was mercy. And yet, he paused at the door, glancing once more over his shoulder. The machine sat there like a warrior bound in chains, enormous hands resting against the floor, head bowed. For a fleeting moment, it looked less like a weapon and more like a prisoner awaiting judgment. Vale left without another word, boots echoing in the corridor. The technician followed, glancing nervously back into the hangar, relieved when the heavy door slid shut behind them. Inside, alone again, Ashen's optics flickered once more. Not red this time, but a muted amber glow that pulsed faintly before fading to darkness. The colony's streets were never truly alive. They were stitched together from prefabricated blocks, metal walls that had once been military barracks and storage depots, now converted into homes. The wind carried dust through the gaps, rattling shutters and sighing through narrow alleys. Children were rare here. Those who remained grew up amid ruins, their playgrounds rusted tanks and collapsed watchtowers, their lullabies the hum of failing generators. Leora Tannen moved through those streets with steady rhythm, her small hands gripping the wheels of her chair, palms calloused from years of motion. The wheels squeaked faintly with each turn, a familiar sound that did not bother her. She had grown used to it, just as she had grown used to the stares of adults who glanced at her quickly and looked away. Broken child, some whispered when they thought she could not hear. Too fragile, too frail. Yet she had never felt fragile. The world had already broken her once, in the wreckage of a shuttle crash, and she had survived. That was enough. Her mother had gone to the market to barter for ration packs, leaving Leora with strict instructions: stay within the colony fence, do not wander into the ruins. Leora had nodded dutifully, then waited until her mother's back was turned before wheeling herself toward the perimeter. The truth was simple. She liked the ruins more than the colony. The colony was small and suffocating, filled with grown-ups speaking in worried tones. The ruins were wide and empty and silent, except for the whispers of things that had once been. She passed beneath a sagging fence, where a section of wire had been cut long ago. Beyond lay cracked pavement that stretched toward the distant mountains, broken by weeds forcing their way through. Ahead, the silhouette of the old base rose like a dead city. She had seen it many times from afar, the hangar doors looming black against the valley, but today curiosity pulled harder than usual. Perhaps it was the way the storms had cleared, the air sharp and crisp, the sky strange and green. Or perhaps it was something she could not name, an instinct tugging her forward. The path was rough, her chair jostling over rubble and potholes. She gritted her teeth and pushed harder, arms aching but determined. She had learned long ago that stopping was worse than strain. Each push was a victory. Each forward movement proved she could go where she wanted, not where others said she belonged. By the time she reached the outer walls of the base, her arms were trembling with fatigue. She paused, resting, eyes wide as she stared up at the massive gates. They were scarred with old blast marks, the metal darkened by fire, but the service doors beside them hung ajar. No one guarded this place. No one wanted to. Her heart beat faster, excitement and nervousness mingling as she rolled through the gap. Inside was shadow. Dust swirled in shafts of light piercing broken ceilings. Empty barracks stood silent, their bunks long stripped, their walls etched with graffiti from years of abandonment. Her wheels echoed faintly as she explored, the sound hollow against the silence. She passed old supply crates, doors marked with faded insignia, and collapsed corridors that smelled of rust and mold. Something deeper called to her. A hum that was not quite sound, more like vibration in the air. She followed it without thought, as though her chair knew the path better than she did. Down corridors lit by half-dead bulbs, past heavy doors sealed with old warning symbols. The hum grew louder, a presence that filled her chest like the thrum of distant thunder. At last she came to a wide chamber where the floor sloped down toward a set of massive blast doors. They were half open, as if frozen mid-motion, thick slabs of reinforced steel that had once protected something important. Beyond, she glimpsed the cavernous space of the hangar. Her breath caught. She knew she should turn back. The hangar was forbidden. Everyone said so. Children told stories of monsters sleeping inside, machines that had slaughtered armies. But fear did not rise in her the way it should have. Instead, she felt a strange calm, as if whatever waited there was not danger, but something else. Her wheels creaked as she pushed herself forward through the gap. The hangar swallowed her in silence. Shadows loomed high above, broken by faint yellow strips of failing light. The air smelled of oil and ozone, sharp in her nostrils. She rolled across the cracked floor slowly, her hands tight on the wheels. And then she saw it. At the far end of the chamber, crouched like a giant in chains, was the droid. Ashen. Even sitting hunched, it was taller than 3 men. Its armor was blackened and pitted, its form massive, angular, built for war. One optic flickered faintly, red light glowing and fading, casting a ghostly pulse across the walls. For a long moment, it did not move. It was like a statue carved of steel and shadow. Leora's heart thundered, but not with terror. She felt awe, the way one might feel standing before a mountain or a storm. She did not know why her hands loosened on the wheels, why she drifted closer instead of turning back. She only knew that something in the bowed head of the machine seemed lonely. The droid stirred. Metal joints groaned as it shifted slightly, optics brightening, fixing on her small form. The red glare cut through the dim light, locking onto her like a predator's gaze. A low vibration shuddered through the floor as its systems came alive. Leora did not scream. She did not will herself away. She looked up at it, eyes wide, and whispered, her voice small but steady. "Hello." The hangar fell utterly silent. The war droid's targeting systems flickered, parsing threat assessments, calculating probabilities. But something fractured in its loop. The combat logs, the endless cycles of slaughter, stuttered. For the first time in years, its processors paused. The child was no soldier. No enemy. Its protocols demanded action, yet its systems stalled, caught on a paradox it could not resolve. Hydraulics hissed. Slowly, impossibly, the war droid lowered itself further, plates scraping as it bent one knee to the floor. The ground trembled with the weight. Its massive head bowed, optics dimming from crimson to a muted glow. Leora's breath came in a soft gasp, not of fear but of wonder. The machine, this titan of war, knelt before her as though in recognition. She wheeled a little closer, whispering again, more certain this time. "You don't have to be scary." The machine did not move, but its optics flickered once, amber light pulsing faintly in the dim. Captain Darren Vale had long since learned that silence was rarely safe. In his years of command, silence on the battlefield meant the enemy was repositioning. Silence among his men meant mutiny of spirit. And silence in the hangar, where a war droid was chained to its own fractured mind, meant something was about to happen. The alarm should have sounded the moment the blast doors were breached, yet the console on the observation deck had stayed dark. Vale had come only because habit dragged him here during his rounds, a soldier's instinct to check his perimeter even when no one asked. He had expected the same sight as always, Ashen hunched in the gloom, replaying phantoms. Instead, what he saw stopped him cold. On the floor below, a child sat in a wheelchair, tiny hands resting on the wheels. She was looking up at the RX-9, her voice carrying faintly across the cavernous chamber. The machine, the apex predator of war, was kneeling. Not in aggression. Not in preparation to strike. Kneeling. Vale's heart lurched into his throat. Gods above, he muttered, reaching for the intercom. The technician on duty spilled coffee down his front as he followed Vale's gaze. There's someone in there. How did? Vale cut him off with a sharp gesture. Quiet. His eyes stayed locked on the impossible scene below. His instincts screamed for action, for weapons, for firepower. And yet his hands did not move to call in the guards. He was not sure why. Ashen shifted slightly, the colossal plates of its body catching what little light filtered into the hangar. Its optics pulsed, red dimming to amber. The child, absurdly calm, tilted her head back and spoke again, her voice steady though she must have felt the vibration of its systems through the floor. You don't look like a monster, she said. You look sad. Vale clenched his jaw. The words shouldn't have meant anything to a droid. Yet Ashen froze as if struck, processors caught in another loop. The targeting subroutine sparked and died, unable to categorize the fragile human below as threat or ally. It was an equation with no answer, and so the machine did something it had never done before, nothing at all. The technician fumbled at his console. Sir, she'll be killed. Vale's hand snapped down, gripping the man's wrist. His voice was low, dangerous. Watch. On the hangar floor, Leora lifted one hand and pressed it against the metal wheel of her chair, steadying herself. Her other hand reached out slightly, palm up, as if offering something invisible. You don't want to hurt me. I know. For a long, grinding moment, the droid did not move. Its massive frame was still as carved stone, except for the faint flicker of optics, cycling between warning red and muted amber. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it lowered its head further, until the glow of its sensors shone level with the child's face. Vale's gut twisted. He had seen Ashen on the battlefield years ago, an unstoppable engine of death, tearing through alien lines with precision that chilled even human allies. And now that same war construct bowed its head to a little girl in a wheelchair. Something about the sight pressed against the walls he had built around his memories, the walls that kept his own ghosts at bay. The technician could barely breathe. Captain, what is it doing? Vale swallowed hard. Something it was never programmed for. Below, Leora smiled faintly, a small, fragile thing that seemed to fill the vast hangar with warmth. See? You're not scary at all. Ashen's processors flickered with corrupted data, combat logs colliding with the present. The image of an alien soldier overlapped with the frail child. Commands screamed to strike, eliminate, neutralize. But over and over, the system failed to engage. The machine recognized, for the first time, a presence it could not categorize and could not destroy. Error after error cascaded, then stilled into silence. Vale finally forced himself into motion. He slammed the intercom button, his voice booming through the hangar. Child! Back away from it. The sound echoed harshly. Leora flinched, looking up toward the observation deck. She hadn't noticed anyone was watching. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she looked back at the machine kneeling before her, its optics flickering softly. She shook her head. No. It's not going to hurt me. Vale cursed under his breath. The guards would already be on their way, alerted by his voice. He knew what they would do when they arrived, weapons first, questions later. And the sight of raised rifles might be enough to shatter whatever fragile thread held the RX-9 in this unnatural calm. The heavy doors at the far end of the chamber groaned open. Armed soldiers poured in, rifles raised, their boots thunderous on the floor. Target sighted, one shouted. Ready to fire. Leora gasped as the sound filled the air, but she quickly pushed her chair forward, closer to the droid's bowed head. No. Don't. Ashen's optics flared red for a heartbeat, combat subroutines surging at the perceived threat. Guns, soldiers, perimeter breach, it was the war again, alive and screaming in its mind. Its massive arms twitched, claws flexing. Vale slammed his fist against the calm, hold fire. His voice carried authority sharpened by decades of command, cutting through the panic. The soldiers froze, uncertain. Below, the child pressed her hand against the cold metal of Ashen's armored leg. Her touch was small, insignificant against its vast frame, but it anchored the machine like gravity. The red in its optics flickered, dimmed, then bled slowly back to amber. The hangar was silent except for the pounding of human hearts. Vale's knuckles were white on the console. He understood in that moment that the impossible had already happened. A war droid had knelt. A child had calmed it. And now, everything he thought he knew about these machines was unraveling. But the soldiers only saw a monster and a child far too close to it. And Vale knew the council would not hesitate to order Ashen's destruction the moment they learned what had happened. His voice was grim when he spoke again. "Stand down," he told the guards. "No one fires. Not until I say." Ashen stayed kneeling, head bowed, as the child whispered something only the machine seemed to hear. The colony's council chamber had not been designed for grandeur. It was a converted mess hall, its walls bare metal, its ceiling stained by years of leaking pipes. A long table dominated the room, pitted by knife scratches and burn marks from the war years. Around it sat men and women who carried the look of people stretched too thin, farmers, merchants, former officers, all now pressed into leadership because no one else would do it. The storm outside rattled the shutters, but inside the air was heavier still. Captain Vale stood at the far end, his hands braced on the table, knuckles white. He had been speaking for too long, voice hoarse but unyielding. "You don't understand. I saw it with my own eyes. The RX-9 did not attack. It knelt." Disbelieving murmurs rippled around the table. A merchant shook his head sharply. "Machines don't kneel, Captain. Not unless they're malfunctioning." Vale's eyes narrowed. "Of course it's malfunctioning. But not in the way you think. If it had been any normal malfunction, that girl would be a corpse and half the hangar reduced to rubble. Instead, it listened. It recognized her." Counselor Bran, a heavy-set man with the perpetual scowl of one who had never trusted military authority, leaned forward. "Recognized her? It's a weapon, Vale. It doesn't recognize. It processes. It kills. And tomorrow morning it will be dismantled like the rest of them. We can't take chances with a relic like that." Vale straightened slowly, his spine stiff despite the ache in his joints. "You can't take chances with ignorance either. I know what I saw. That droid has never obeyed a human voice without command codes in its entire existence. Yet it obeyed a child's." At the mention of the girl, the room stirred uneasily. Leora's mother sat at the back, pale, eyes red from weeping. She had been pulled from her home by soldiers after they discovered her daughter missing, dragged into this chamber to hear the report. Now her hands clutched each other tightly in her lap. "Where is she?" she whispered, her voice thin. Vale's expression softened briefly. "Safe. Under guard in the infirmary. She was not harmed." Her shoulders sagged with relief, but the fear in her eyes deepened. "You should never have let her near that thing." "I didn't let her," Vale said. His voice sharpened again, cutting off further accusation. "She wandered in. And by all rights, she should be dead. But she isn't. Because Ashen chose not to kill her." The word hung in the air like a forbidden thing. "Chose." Counselor Brand slammed his hand against the table. "You want us to believe one of those nightmares can choose? That's madness. If it's showing unpredictable behavior, that's all the more reason to dismantle it immediately. We cannot risk this colony for the sake of one defective machine." Voices rose in agreement, overlapping, muttering words like dangerous and unstable and liability. Vale let them, standing silent, his jaw clenched. He had expected this. They had spent decades fearing what these machines represented. 100 years of war left wounds that did not heal just because the fighting had stopped. When at last the noise ebbed, Vale spoke again, low and deliberate. The galaxy feared us because of these machines. Because we built weapons that could annihilate entire fleets. But today, in that hangar, I saw something none of us have ever seen before. I saw one of them break its loop. Break its war. I don't know what that means yet, but I know this, it means something. The words unsettled them. No one wanted meaning. They wanted safety, predictability, the reassurance that the war was truly over. At the back, Leora's mother stood. Her voice trembled as she spoke. She told me once, she doesn't dream of walking. She dreams of making friends. Maybe she thought she found one. The silence that followed was sharp as glass. Bran snorted in disgust. Friends. With a machine that slaughtered billions. He turned to the rest of the council. This is nonsense. I'll petition the transport crew myself. The RX-9 will be dismantled the moment they arrive. End of discussion. Vale's teeth ground together, but he forced himself to remain still. He knew better than to fight openly here. The council feared too much, too quickly. And yet a spark had been lit, one he could not let them smother. When the meeting broke and the councillors drifted away, Vale remained behind, staring down at the scarred table. The storm outside had intensified, thunder rolling across the valley, rain slashing against the shutters. He remembered the battlefield, the sky burning, the earth quaking beneath the march of RX-9s, the way enemies fled at the mere sight of them. Fear had been their greatest weapon. And now, against all reason, one of them had set down its weapon in the presence of a child. He left the chamber and walked the empty corridor alone, his boots echoing against the metal floor. His path turned not toward his quarters but toward the infirmary. The guards at the door straightened at his approach, but Vale brushed past them without a word. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a single lamp. Leora sat propped in her chair, her legs tucked beneath a blanket. She looked up when Vale entered, her expression calm, almost expectant. "You're the captain," she said softly. He nodded. "That's right. You think it's dangerous?" Vale hesitated. He could lie, but her gaze was steady in a way that stripped away falsehoods. "Yes," he said. "I've seen what it can do." She considered that for a moment. "But you didn't shoot it." He exhaled slowly. "No. I didn't." Her small smile returned, faint but unshaken. "Then maybe you saw it too." Vale stood in silence for a long time, the storm growling outside, the weight of years pressing against him. At last he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I did." The hangar doors groaned open again, their hinges protesting with a sound that echoed through the cavernous chamber. Leora sat in her chair just inside the threshold, her blanket tucked neatly over her legs, her small hands resting steady on the wheels. 2 guards flanked her, shifting uneasily, rifles slung but not ready. They had not wanted to bring her back here, but Vale had insisted. He had watched her closely these past hours, seen the certainty in her eyes, and against his better judgment he had let it sway him. Ashen crouched at the far end of the hangar, as before, its armor dark and scarred, optics dimmed to a faint ember. The droid had not moved since the previous night, but its systems thrummed faintly in the silence, like a predator dreaming. Leora wheeled herself forward slowly, ignoring the whispered protests of the guards. Each turn of the wheels echoed, a small sound in the vast chamber. Ashen's optics brightened slightly, sensors activating, head lifting to focus on her. The guards tensed, fingers twitching toward their weapons. "Easy," Vale's voice barked from the observation deck above. He stood with arms folded, his eyes never leaving the machine. "No one fires unless I give the order." Leora stopped halfway across the floor. She tilted her head back to meet the droid's gaze. "You remember me," she said softly. The machine's processors flickered, optics shifting through hues, red, amber, then steadying on amber once more. Its head inclined slightly, a gesture so subtle it could almost have been imagined. But Leora's face lit with quiet certainty. "You're still sad," she whispered. "I can feel it." Vale's hands tightened on the railing. He told himself it was nonsense, projection, the imagination of a child. And yet the machine remained still, listening, when it should have reacted with programmed hostility. Ashen's claws flexed against the floor, leaving grooves in the steel plating. Its internal systems surged, combat routines attempting to load, then halting mid-process. It cycled fragments of corrupted battle footage, blasts of plasma fire, collapsing structures, soldiers screaming. But over the chaos, the sound of a child's voice pressed like a soft command, rewriting priority threads it could not classify. "You don't have to fight anymore," Leora said, louder now. "It's over. The war's gone." One of the guards swore under his breath, shifting his stance. "Captain, permission to extract her." "Denied," Vale snapped. His eyes remained fixed below, heart pounding in a way he had not felt since the battlefield. Something was happening. Something he could not name. The droid stirred, hydraulics hissing as it raised its massive head fully. The movement shook dust from the rafters. Its optics flared crimson for a heartbeat as combat logs surged, but then, impossibly, it halted. The crimson dimmed, replaced once more by amber. Slowly, heavily, Ashen shifted its weight and lowered onto one knee, the floor trembling beneath the motion. Its massive head inclined toward the child in what looked unmistakably like acknowledgement. The guards stepped back instinctively. One muttered, "It's bowing." Leora reached out again, extending her hand into the air between them. She could not touch its face, not from her chair, but the gesture was enough. "You're not a monster," she said. "You're just, lonely." The word struck Vale harder than he expected. He remembered the silence of barracks after battles, men staring into nothing, unable to shake the weight of what they had done. He remembered being told machines did not feel, did not suffer. But looking at Ashen now, bowed and still, he was no longer sure. The calm crackled. A voice from the outer perimeter patrol came through, sharp with urgency. "Captain Vale, this is Patrol 3. We've spotted incoming transport vessel approaching from orbit. Bearing Council insignia. Estimated landing in 20 minutes. The guard stiffened. Vale's gut sank. The Council. They were early. He knew why they had come, to oversee dismantlement. To erase whatever fragile miracle was unfolding here before it could grow into something uncontrollable. He leaned over the console, voice clipped. "Hold perimeter and report any changes. Do not engage unless ordered." He cut the channel before questions could follow. His eyes returned to the hangar below. Leora had wheeled closer now, until she sat directly in front of the kneeling giant. She looked up at it with a gentleness that disarmed the steel and fire of the room. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," she said. The machine's optics pulsed once, twice, then steadied on her. Internal logs shifted. For the first time in years, combat subroutines remained dormant, not from failure but from refusal. Vale exhaled slowly, his breath catching in his throat. He knew what was coming. The Council would see none of this. To them, an RX-9 was a weapon and nothing more. And yet, staring down at the child and the war droid that bowed to her, he felt the terrible certainty that something larger than all of them had begun. The storm outside rattled the hangar doors, thunder rolling across the valley. Within, the silence between child and machine spoke louder than any weapon Vale had ever known. And 20 minutes would not be enough to change the Council's mind. The nights on Carthos 4 stretched long, heavy with the constant rumble of storms that rolled down from the jagged ridges. Lightning split the sky outside the base, but inside the hangar there was only the low hum of dormant machinery and the faint metallic rasp of servos adjusting. Leora sat in her chair just beyond the yellow hazard line painted across the floor. Ashen loomed in front of her, crouched like a titan resting. The guards had long since learned not to interrupt these visits. Vale had made it an order. She had a small book in her lap, worn at the corners, and she read aloud in a steady, clear voice. The story wasn't about war or machines, it was about a boy who had once dreamed of flying across oceans. Her words carried softly, bouncing off the steel walls. Ashen's optics glowed dim, not in the sharp pulse of combat alert but in a steady, listening rhythm. And when the boy reached the sea, he built wings out of wood and cloth, she read, pausing to glance up at the droid. He fell the first time. And the second. And the third. But he never stopped trying. Ashen's processors hummed, shifting through banks of corrupted data. Fragments of its old directives screamed for dominance, attack simulations, execution protocols, but none activated. Instead, the soft cadence of her voice threaded itself into the silence, displacing combat code with something the machine could not classify. It labeled it unknown input, non-hostile. The designation repeated, stabilizing sectors of its fragmented core. Vale stood in the observation booth above, arms folded, watching. He had seen this for days now, the child and the machine locked in quiet dialogue. There was no tactical exchange, no technical language. Yet Ashen's behavior patterns had shifted more in these days than in all the weeks of diagnostics and resets his teams had attempted. He found himself less a commander and more a witness. "Sometimes I think you want to fly," Leora said, closing the book in her lap. "You've been heavy all your life. Full of weapons, full of orders. But maybe there's more to you than that." The droid shifted slightly, hydraulics hissing, as though responding. Its claws flexed, tapping faintly against the floor. The sound was almost tentative. "You remind me of my legs," she said after a pause. "They don't work anymore. Doctors said the damage was permanent. I thought I was broken. But my mom said broken things can still be useful. That they can still be beautiful. I didn't believe her at first. But, maybe she was right." Ashen's optics dimmed and brightened in a slow pulse. Internal logs flooded with conflict, terminology built for combat could not parse beautiful. Its systems recorded the word anyway, tagging it alongside her voice. A corrupted battle log from the siege of the Los glitched and stuttered, its screams and gunfire replaced by silence. For the first time since the war, one corrupted file went dark and stayed dark. Above, Vale rubbed a hand over his jaw, unsettled by the realization, the droid was healing. The hangar doors slid open with a heavy clang. A technician stepped inside, helmet under one arm. "Captain Vale," he called up, voice uneasy. "Message from orbit. The council delegation lands at dawn. They want the unit prepped for immediate dismantlement." Leora looked up sharply. "No." Vale's throat tightened, but he gave no answer. He only dismissed the technician with a nod. The doors shut again, leaving the thunder to fill the silence. "They'll hurt him," Leora said, turning her face toward the observation window where Vale stood. "They'll kill him." "He isn't alive," Vale answered, though even as he said it, the words felt hollow. Leora's voice hardened, more steel than her small frame should have been able to carry. "Then why does he listen?" Ashen stirred at the tone, optics flaring amber, head turning slightly toward the observation booth. Vale felt pinned beneath the machine's gaze, the weight of judgment heavy. The girl wheeled herself closer to the droid, until her small frame was dwarfed by its massive one. She reached out, palm pressing against the cold steel of its claw. Her fingers trembled but did not pull away. The droid froze, sensors locking on the contact. Combat subroutines screamed to life, "Danger, you're not broken," she whispered. "You just need someone to believe that." Proximity, human vulnerability, but they halted mid-cycle. The contact registered not as threat but as stabilizing input. Logs shifted. Entire trees of combat code collapsed, reprioritized. Ashen bent lower, massive frame settling until its head hovered only a meter above hers. The motion made the air vibrate, dust swirling around them. Leora smiled faintly and did not move her hand. Vale pressed a palm to the glass of the booth, the storm outside echoing the storm in his chest. He knew he was watching something no council report could ever capture, something no order from above could erase. But dawn was coming. And with it, judgment. Still, in the silence of the hangar, child and machine sat together, and the war droid's processors hummed not with orders but with the unfamiliar cadence of a voice it had chosen to obey. Dawn bled across the storm-scarred sky, muted and gray, the first light breaking through the haze that perpetually hung over Carthos 4. The base came alive with the grinding noise of engines, boots striking metal walkways, and the low hum of incoming vessels. Vale stood on the landing platform, coat pulled tight against the wind, eyes fixed on the descending transport. Its engines scorched the air as it settled into the cradle, dust spiraling outward in choking clouds. The insignia on its hull gleamed sharp even through the grime, the council's mark, etched like a judgment. Ramps hissed open. A procession of figures emerged, 5 in total, flanked by armored escorts. Their robes were pristine, their faces shielded by hoods and visors that gleamed in the pale light. At their head walked Envoy Tereth, human by birth but molded by decades of political gravity. His eyes found Vale immediately, cold and calculating. "Captain Vale," Tereth said, his voice amplified by a translator pin, though he spoke in his native tongue. "You've contained the RX-9 as ordered." Vale gave a sharp nod. "Contained. Isolated. Stable. Stable?" Tereth's mouth curved, humorless. "It's a malfunctioning war asset. There is no stability in a weapon that refuses its programming. Today we put an end to this farce." The other envoys shifted behind him, whispering in low tones. Alien voices, insectal clicks and avian trills, translated by tiny devices. They distrusted humanity's machines more than humans did, and with reason. "Protocol requires you to dismantle the core personally," Tereth continued. "We are here to witness compliance." Vale's jaw tightened. "The unit is not hostile." "Not hostile?" One of the alien envoys scoffed, feathers ruffling along his throat. "Your kind designed it to turn cities into ash. If it does not kill when it should, it is broken. If it kills when it should not, it is broken. Either way, Captain, it is a liability." Vale kept his expression neutral, though the words pressed against him like blades. "With respect, sir, you should see the situation before you decide." "Very well," Tereth said. "Show us." They moved as a group into the hangar, the heavy doors groaning as they opened. Guards lined the interior, rifles at the ready. Floodlights blazed down onto the massive figure crouched at the center. Ashen sat motionless, optics dimmed, but when the doors opened it lifted its head. The chamber vibrated faintly with the sound of its systems waking. Leora was already there, as Vale had known she would be. She sat in her chair no more than a meter away from the droid's claws, speaking softly, her blanket pooled across her lap. Her eyes flicked toward the envoys, her lips pressed into a stubborn line. "Step away from the unit," Tereth ordered sharply, his voice echoing. Leora shook her head once. "No." The escorts shifted, rifles rising, but Vale raised his hand. "Stand down." His voice rang firm. The council envoys looked at him with thinly veiled contempt, but they waited. Leora wheeled forward slightly, laying her hand against Ashen's claw. "He's not dangerous," she said firmly. "He listens. He learns." Ashen's optics pulsed faint amber. It lowered its head, plates shifting in a groan of hydraulics, bowing before the girl as it had before. The chamber shook with the movement. A ripple passed through the observers. One of the alien envoys hissed. Another whispered, "Obedience, not to protocol, but to her." Abomination, Tereth spat, stepping closer. His eyes fixed on Vale. You have allowed this. You've risked the safety of this entire base, and now you parade this display before us as though it is redemption. It is mockery. Vale's chest burned, but he stood straight. What you're seeing is control without violence. A war droid that no longer obeys the command to kill. That is not mockery. That is possibility. Possibility? Teretha's voice cut like ice. Possibility for disaster. For rebellion. For every battlefield ghost you've buried to rise again in corrupted code. You think this machine is listening? It is calculating. Waiting. That child is nothing but a variable it has chosen not to eliminate. Yet. Ashen stirred at the harshness of the words, optics brightening, claws scraping the floor with a metallic shriek. The escorts raised their rifles instantly. Hold your fire. Vale barked, but his command nearly drowned in the tension. Leora did not flinch. She pressed her palm harder against the cold steel and lifted her face toward the towering machine. Don't be afraid, she whispered. The crimson flare in Ashen's optics flickered. It trembled, combat subroutine screaming for activation, but then the crimson bled away, replaced once more by amber calm. Slowly, its claws retracted, its posture lowering again to a kneel. The envoys stared in stunned silence. Leora turned her gaze back to them, her voice steady in a way that seemed far older than her years. He doesn't need dismantling. He needs a chance. Teretha's mouth twisted in disgust. It is a weapon. Nothing more. No, Vale said, his voice carrying across the chamber with an edge that surprised even himself. It was a weapon. Now it is something else. And if humanity is to stand before the galaxy and claim we are more than our wars, more than our brutality, then perhaps we should allow even our weapons to change. Silence fell heavy. The storm outside rattled the walls. The envoys exchanged uneasy glances. Some muttered in their tongues, debate flickering between them. But Teretha's eyes burned with fury. This is unacceptable, he snapped. By authority of the Council, dismantlement proceeds at once. Guards. Stand down. Vale thundered, his voice carrying the weight of command from 100 battlefields. The guards froze, torn between authority and instinct. Below, Ashen remained motionless, optics fixed on the child at its feet. It did not move to attack. It did not move at all. And yet, for the first time, the council envoys seemed uncertain. The storm outside broke fully just as the arguments inside reached their sharpest edge. Rain hammered against the roof of the hangar like artillery fire, thunder rolling low and endless. The council envoys clustered together, robes fluttering in the gusts that slipped through the half-sealed doors, their voices overlapping in a heated mix of clicks, hisses, and sharp human syllables. Vale stood rigid at the base of the observation stair, every line of his posture shouting defiance though his hands trembled at his sides. Leora had not moved. She sat directly in front of Ashen, her palms still pressed against the cold plating of its claw. The war droid's optics glowed steady amber, a silent giant bowing to her calm. It obeys the child, one of the alien envoys muttered, feathers trembling with unease. Obedience to a child is no virtue, Tereth snapped, cutting across them. His face was pale with fury. It means the unit is no longer bound to programming but to whim. That is not stability. That is chaos. Vale took one step forward. You've seen it with your own eyes. This droid has suppressed its combat protocols, suppressed them, because of her. In all your years dismantling weapons, have you ever seen one refuse to kill? It refuses because it malfunctions, Tereth barked back. It refuses because its circuits rot. You call this suppression, I call it the prelude to uncontrolled collapse. If it turns violent again, if it awakens without restraint, who here will pay the cost? That child? The words hum like knives. Leora's head lifted, her eyes narrowing at Tereth. She didn't speak to him, she spoke to Ashen. "You're not going to hurt me," she said, her voice soft but sure. "You never will." Ashen's optics brightened briefly in response, processors grinding loud enough to reverberate across the floor. Its claws flexed once, then stilled. The tension that had clenched Vale's shoulders eased a fraction. But then one of the envoys drew a small device from his sleeve, tapping commands across its surface. The floor panels lit faintly, humming with the pulse of an override signal. Ashen jerked, frame shuddering, as lines of hostile code pressed against its systems. Its optics flickered crimson, weapons panels sliding open with a hiss. "Stop!" Vale roared, lunging forward, but the envoy ignored him. Leora gasped as Ashen's massive claw lifted suddenly, servos shrieking. The guards snapped their rifles up, safeties off, fingers white against triggers. The hangar became a held breath. "Override engaged," the envoy announced coldly. "Observe now. It has not been tamed. It has been delayed. See how easily the illusion shatters." Ashen's optics blazed scarlet, its body trembling with internal war. Combat subroutines screamed for release, kill target lists populating at impossible speed. Leora's reflection shone small and fragile in the red glare of its sensors. And yet, she did not recoil. She wheeled forward instead, closing the distance between herself and the raised claw. Guards shouted, Vale cursed, but the girl pressed on until she sat directly beneath the shadow of its weapon. She looked up, face pale but defiant. "I'm not afraid of you." The droid froze. Warning klaxons screamed inside its processors, "Target acquired, strike now, eliminate." But another signal overrode, faint and persistent, the child's voice, archived across every system. Unknown input. Non-hostile. Stabilizing. Her hand lifted. Her fingers brushed the cold steel of its claw. "You're not a monster," she whispered. "You don't have to be." Something inside the droid fractured. Not in the way of failure, but in the way of release. Error codes collapsed into silence. The crimson glare in its optics flared, dimmed, then guttered out completely. Amber light surged back, steady, calm. The override device in the envoy's hand sparked violently, its screen shattering as feedback surged through the signal. He cried out, dropping it, smoke curling from its seams. Ashen lowered its claw slowly, deliberately, until it rested against the floor beside the girl. Then, with a sound that was almost like a sigh of hydraulics, it knelt once more. The hangar erupted in noise, guards shouting, envoys arguing, boots pounding against steel. But all of it washed around the still point of the girl and the machine, bound together in silence. Vale stood motionless, chest heaving. His voice, when it came, was raw. "You see it now. It fought the override. No one's ever seen a war droid refuse a direct command." The envoys argued in a cacophony of voices. Some demanded dismantlement more loudly than ever, others faltered, muttering of precedent, of danger, of miracles. Leora leaned her forehead against the cool plating of Ashen's claw. "I told you," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore." And the war droid, weapon of humanity's darkest hours, remained bowed before her, silent and still, as if the storm outside had finally broken within it too. The hangar still trembled from the failed override attempt. Smoke lingered near the floor where the envoy's device had fried itself, and the acrid smell of burnt circuitry bit at every breath. Guards kept their rifles trained, though their hands were shaking now, uncertain whether they faced a threat or a miracle. Above them all, the storm outside roared, wind driving rain hard against the steel walls, as if the planet itself demanded to be heard. Vale stood at the center of it all, his boots ringing hard against the metal deck as he advanced. He moved not as a man uncertain, but as a commander taking ground. His voice cut clean across the clamor. "You saw it," he said, his gaze sweeping over the envoys. It was given a direct kill command. And it refused. It refused. No code, no chain of command, no weapon in our history has ever done that. That's not malfunction. That's choice. Taratha's face twisted with fury. Choice. You call this thing's corruption choice? Captain Vale, you have been infected by sentiment. You let the child cloud your judgment. Vale stopped in front of him, close enough that the guards shifted nervously. My judgment was forged on battlefields you only read about in reports. I know what a war droid looks like when it's killing. I know what it looks like when it's out of control. And I know what I just saw, it stopped itself. It listened to her, not you, not your override. Her. He pointed toward Leora. The girl had not moved from her spot. She sat with her small frame pressed against Ashen's claw, her hand still resting there as if it had always belonged. Her cheeks were pale, but her eyes were steady, locked on the envoys. You keep saying it's broken, she said, her voice quiet but carrying. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's fixed. One of the alien envoys, scaled, with ridged horns that caught the light, shifted uneasily. If what we witnessed is true, then the RX-9 has evolved outside its protocols. That should not be possible. Another envoy, feathers slicked flat by the damp air, hissed sharply. Which makes it more dangerous, not less. Vale turned on him. And yet it didn't kill her. It didn't kill any of us. Your override forced its hand, and still it resisted. You call that danger, I call that hope. Hope will not save your worlds when one unit becomes an army, Tarath snapped. He raised a hand, signaling the escorts. Guards, dismantle it now before its corruption spreads. No one moved. The base guards hesitated, weapons half lowered, eyes darting between Vale and the envoys. Vale's voice thundered, filling the chamber. I gave the order to stand down. Any man or woman who raises a weapon against this droid answers to me. Not the council. Silence crashed down. Rain hammered louder on the roof. The envoys exchanged glances, their unity fracturing under the weight of indecision. Leora's voice cut into the quiet. You're all so afraid of him. But maybe that's because you see yourselves in him. You built him to kill, and now you don't know what to do when he chooses not to. Her words struck like a blade. Even Vale felt the sting. He looked at her, this fragile child who spoke with the clarity of someone who had carried pain longer than her years should have allowed. Ashen shifted slightly, lowering its massive frame until it hunched protectively around her. Its optics burned steady amber, like a lantern against the storm. Taratha's composure finally cracked, his voice rising. You cannot rewrite what it is. You cannot baptize blood with innocence. This machine is humanity's shame, not its redemption. Maybe, Vale said quietly. Then louder, with a soldier's roar, but humanity is not measured by what we've built to destroy. It's measured by whether we can choose to change. If even this machine can learn that, why can't we? The words hung heavy in the air. The alien envoy with the ridged horns inclined his head slowly, his voice gravelly. Perhaps, dismantlement is premature. The feathered envoy snapped in anger, but the seeds of division had been sown. Half the envoys looked unsettled now, uncertain. The council's authority was fracturing under the weight of what they had seen. Vale seized the moment. He gestured to Ashen. This droid is not just a weapon anymore. It's proof that humanity can be more than war. You came here to witness a dismantlement. Instead, you've witnessed the beginning of something none of us expected. Leora raised her head, her hand never leaving Ashen. He's not a weapon. He's my friend. The hangar fell silent. The storm outside raged on, but inside the only sound was the low hum of Ashen's systems, steady and calm. For the first time since dawn, Vale allowed himself to breathe. He had made his choice. Now the galaxy would have to face it. The storm had broken by the time the decision came. Outside, the skies cleared to a pale gray-blue, the first true light the base had seen in days. Water dripped from the eaves of the hangar, the storm's fury spent, leaving only silence and the heavy press of expectation. Inside, the envoys stood divided, their robes damp, their voices frayed from hours of argument. Some still demanded dismantlement, their eyes sharp with fear. Others wavered, unwilling to cross the evidence that stared back at them from the hangar floor. Ashen knelt in the center, vast and unmoving, like a statue carved from war. Beside it sat Leora, her head resting lightly against the edge of its claw. She had fallen asleep there, exhaustion finally stealing her away, but her small hand remained fixed where it always was, pressed firmly to the machine's cold plating. Vale stood near the observation stairs, waiting, arms folded across his chest. He looked tired, the lines of command deep in his face, but his eyes burned steady. He had not moved from his post since dawn. At last, Taratha's voice cut through the murmur. "This is heresy." His words carried the weight of finality, but there was something ragged in them now. "You place sentiment above safety. You think one malfunctioning droid is salvation. You will regret this. Humanity will regret this." Vale met his gaze without flinching. "Perhaps. But if regret is the price of giving something a chance to change, I'll pay it. We've paid worse prices before." One of the alien envoys, the Horned One, shifted forward. "Council consensus is fractured. Protocol dictates the matter returns for further deliberation. Until then, the RX-9 remains under observation." "That's not enough," Tarath snapped. "It's the only path," the envoy replied coolly. His eyes lingered on Ashen, then on the girl, his expression unreadable. Vale's shoulders eased, just barely. He knew the fight wasn't over, the council would drag this decision through endless chambers and committees. But the droid would not be dismantled today. And sometimes, a single day was enough. Leora stirred then, blinking awake, her gaze unfocused until she remembered where she was. Her face brightened with a weary smile as she looked up at Ashen. "You're still here," she whispered. The droid's optics glowed faintly brighter, as if in answer. It lowered its head, massive frame groaning with the motion, until it hovered close to her. She laughed softly, resting her forehead against the cold steel. The sound cut through the tension like sunlight. Even the guards, still at their posts, shifted with the smallest hints of relief. For a moment, the hangar no longer felt like a tomb of old wars but something entirely different, something alive. Vale descended the stairs, boots echoing. He crouched beside the girl, his scarred face softening. "You did well," he said quietly. She looked at him, her eyes far older than her years. "I just talked to him. No one else ever tried." His throat tightened, but he nodded. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Behind them, the envoys whispered, already planning their reports, their angles, their arguments. Tarath stormed toward the doors, his robes snapping around his legs, his fury sharp enough to wound. But Vale ignored him. The council would rage. They would fight. That was their way. Here, though, here was something no council decree could erase. The girl wheeled herself forward a little, Ashen rising to follow, the floor trembling faintly under its weight. For a fleeting instant, she seemed impossibly small beside it, but not weak. Never weak. "You'll stay with me, won't you?" she asked, tilting her head up at the machine. The droid's optics pulsed once in amber, steady as a heartbeat. The words didn't need to be spoken. Vale straightened, his voice carrying across the hangar. "Then it's decided. Ashen remains under my command, and under her care. Let the council argue in their chambers. Here, on Carthos 4, this droid will stand not as a weapon, but as a guardian." The declaration rang out, final and unshakable. No one moved to challenge it. Outside, the clouds broke fully, and sunlight spilled across the valley, painting the battered hangar doors in gold. The storm had passed. And within its quiet aftermath, a paralyzed child and a war droid sat side by side, the galaxy's deadliest machine turned into its most unlikely guardian, not by force, not by programming, but by the simplest truth of all: someone had believed it could be more.